purpose of the presentation is to explain the experience of launching in Brazil, particularly how it compares to what we did in the US, which is a market that I think most of you are familiar about and are familiar with our activity here. So just show of hands, who's familiar with the DAZN business in the US market, knows our product and have seen it, and who understands the business outside of the US in international markets? Okay, that's good. So the thought process to launch a market, it's usually the same wherever you operate. I would say what we did in the US was slightly different, and I'll get into that, and primarily because of market conditions and competitive landscape. But whenever we go to a new market, there's a thought process to apply to every operation. So first, we identify our point of entry. So we need to be able to acquire a property that is high passion, that we know will move the needle and will bring a lot of people to the platform. The second step would be to experiment as much as possible to acquire a number of other rights that we can bring to the platform, understand how people value those, how those rights perform in those particular markets, if they work for retention, if they allow us to expand the addressable market to reach a new cohort of subscribers, or if they simply don't have enough value in that particular market. Once we experiment and understand that market after the first, perhaps second year, then we need to define a path for sustainable economics very quickly. So the business needs to work, right? So we need to make the right investment in rights. Our cost of acquisition needs to be lower than our lifetime value. So it's a simple business, right? But it needs to work, but we don't really understand what's going to work in every market until start doing it, because it's a new platform, and we need to change consumer habits as we're kind of experimenting and as we're bringing more people to the platform. So hopefully, over time, we position our business to acquire the tier one properties that will become available in every market. So the entry point is the challenge a bit, right? Because our whole business model is predicated on the fact that we need to do this on a market-by-market basis. It doesn't work to acquire global property that we think would work in every market. We all know sports don't work like that. So we need to understand demand for that specific market. But on the other hand, we know that content is limited. We're not able to enter any market whenever we want. We're not able to acquire the properties that we would like to have usually to start with. So we know we need to define an entry point and then build the business from that. The hardest part in this entry phase is to really distinguish kind of the audience data. What really kind of will move a lot of people to the platform, what I'd say, what people are passionate enough to come to the platform no matter what. So they wake up on a Sunday morning and they really look for that particular game no matter what. Or if you're a casual fan, if you remove that event from the platform you're used to consuming, you might not notice, or you're not going to actively look for that property elsewhere. So that was the challenge for us in every market. So we need to understand how to entry, and most importantly, we need to recognize that in most cases we're not going to have the portfolio of rights that we want, but we know that we will eventually be able to get there. The entry point in Brazil was a competition called Copa Sudamericana. For those of you not as familiar with the South American football or soccer landscape, this is equivalent to Europa League in Europe. So it's not Champions League, it's the one right below that. On one hand, people tend to say it's not as valuable, but we knew this would be an interesting entry point for us because we're guaranteed to have at least 6 popular Brazilian clubs playing this competition every year. So we knew that had enough passion point to allow us to hopefully launch a service in the market. But on the other hand, the format, when you look at the format of this competition in particular, is probably the least optimal property for a monthly subscription service like DAZN. It's a very challenging one because, one, it's a pure knockout competition, so clubs can get eliminated in the first round, 2 games. I don't have the Brazilian club anymore the rest of the year. We just lost one last night, by the way, so it's one of the problems we have to deal with. The teams vary from year to year, so the qualification to this event is based on ranking of in the previous season of the Brazilian League, so we're not guaranteed to have the same teams playing every year. So that means we might have to renew our subscriber base from one year to the other, because if I don't have the teams playing on the platform, subscribers will just churn, right? And the third point that makes it very challenging is the schedule, which is very infrequent. So we have some significant gaps from the rounds between the, let's say, second and third round that create a big problem for a monthly subscription service like DAZN. So the graph here shows essentially kind of how this competition works for our business, right? So you have first months of the year, you have high acquisition moments when a lot of teams are playing, but as they get eliminated, your acquisition moments diminish over the year, and on top of that, you have like some very significant gaps. For example, from between March and April, like we don't have any top South American football events available on the platform. So that event in itself, it's a very challenging one for a monthly subscription like ours. But we knew that going in, right? So we knew that was what we had to launch in the market, and we had to then figure out a strategy to solve for some of those problems. So when you look at the Sudamericana subscription profile for this event alone, you have a pretty volatile experience that probably wouldn't justify our marketing investment, right? Our cost of acquisition would be too high, people wouldn't stay. So we had to figure out a model to essentially try to stabilize the business. So that would be our goal, right? So you start looking at a number of other properties that could be available in the market that you add to your portfolio that you think, on one hand, will help you retain a lot of those soccer fans that would come to the platform. So you hope that you deliver enough value for them so they recognize the value to stay as a subscriber, even though you don't have enough frequency of their favorite club, but you deliver enough value for a soccer fan. But you also look for some other properties that allow you to expand your addressable market and bring some avid fans, sometimes niche fans, but that will come in, and then in aggregate you have a subscriber base that is much more stable and that you can eventually build a base that will allow you to acquire the top properties that will become available. So in Brazil, the portfolio that we were able to aggregate ahead of launch, it had 3 buckets in our mind. So the first one is the premium international soccer. So we benefited from a lot of consolidation in the market, with Turner deciding to shut down their sports dedicated channel, Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox, and with ESPN, Fox Sports getting stuck in some regulatory uncertainty, we're able to acquire a number of international soccer rights that were relevant to the Brazilian audience at a pretty cost-effective rate. So we acquired exclusive rights to Italian Serie A with Cristiano Ronaldo as a main attraction, Ligue 1, the French Ligue 1, which features Neymar, Brazilian star, playing for PSG. We were able to sub-license rights from ESPN. We got 2 Premier League matches per round. So with that, we were able to build a portfolio that we would hope would be interesting enough for a significant number of those soccer fans that would come to the platform because of Sudamericana. We didn't view those events as significant acquisition drivers, so we knew a lot of our subscribers would come to the service because of domestic soccer events, but those would serve very well to retain a good number of them. The second bucket was to try to go a little bit more local and identify some of these soccer rights that would be available that, even though smaller, would give us maybe more regularity, and we knew that would bring some fans because they had a high passion point. The interesting case for us was the third division of Brazilian soccer, because a lot of people would initially dismissed that. You're talking about like a third division for kind of the US audience that isn't as familiar with the division system, but clubs play the first division, they get relegated to second division. In this case, they were relegated to the third division because they were not playing so well. So usually clubs that are going through hard times financially, but we identified some clubs that had a pretty popular fan base that made this acquisition sensible for our business. So we made that investment, and it worked really well because we attracted a significant number of subscribers, and we offered something that was season-long that would retain a lot of people and offer something to those guys every weekend. The third bucket was then other sports. So we try to acquire quite a few verticals to test demand for the other sports. So everybody knows that Brazil is a soccer-mad country, and soccer is something that would definitely work and will be the main driver for our business. But we wanted to understand the appetite for some of the other sports to really see if it could build, in aggregate, a larger subscriber base. We invested in a basketball vertical, doing deals with the local basketball league, with FIBA and the Euro League. We invested in MMA. Brazil has also a tradition in a lot of fighting sports, MMA, boxing, and so we invested a lot in that. And we acquired tennis rights and auto sports rights. So a lot of volume of content that we could test out. The strategy for this last bucket of content, the other sports, was more experimentation. So we used our position in that market in that particular time to negotiate early exit in pretty much all contracts. So the goal here was to test them out for a few months, but not tie ourselves to very long-term agreements, like 3 or 4 years, because a lot of those were essentially uncertain for us. So we wanted to understand demand. If they didn't work, we'd simply not renew and shift the investment to properties that we knew were working better or would become available in the market. So after the first 9 months of operation now, there are quite a few of those contracts that were not renewing. There are many of them that are simply not working. They were not interesting enough for the Brazilian audience in our service, right? So maybe people are interested in those if they are in a different channel, a different type of platform. But for our platform, a lot of those properties didn't work. So we're simply terminating those agreements and moving on to focus on other properties that we think will work better. We also made a lot of investments in original content. That was pretty interesting. Also with the goal of retaining some of those soccer fans that were coming to the platform. So we introduced formats and features that were not necessarily known or familiar to the Brazilian audience, but that were very well received, showing kind of backstages of some of the clubs and things that we're probably doing a lot more now because they worked as a retention for our portfolio. So when we think about Brazil and the global spectrum of the DAZN markets right now, we're kind of mid-tier. I'd say on one hand, you have the US, which is a more event-based. We're more focused on fighting sports, and it's very, I'd say, specialized in that vertical primarily. On the other hand, we have tier one markets, or markets where we were able to acquire some very important properties over time, or even to launch, like Italy, where we acquired a third of the Italian Serie A for the Italian market. That allowed us to launch with a very fast growth. Whereas Germany, where we started with some international soccer rights, but over time we acquired Champions League, and then we added Bundesliga to the portfolio, and now we have a pretty substantial subscriber base. Japan was also an example where we acquired a lot of rights to start with, and we were able to develop the subscriber base very quickly. In the mid-tier, we have markets like Canada, Spain, and Brazil that are markets that we have good rights that are relevant for that particular market, but I wouldn't describe as markets where we have like tier one properties in our portfolio where we're able to be kind of the number one or number two broadcasters in the market. We hope to get there, and the strategy is really to position the business to eventually allow us to be in a position to acquire the volume of domestic rights. But the position in Brazil was interesting because given the market conditions that I just explained, we were able to acquire a very significant volume of content. So we launched in that market with the marketing claim of more live sports than anybody else. The sheer volume of content that we offered on the platform, the soccer games, tennis matches, all the basketball games, and we didn't have the traditional channel capacity issues to deal with, so we just put all the volume of content available out to the subscribers, also to see what people would value, what they would watch, right? So a lot of the international soccer leagues, they would, broadcasters would distribute like 2 or 3 matches per week max. So we decided to put, all matches of Italian Serie A to see if there was like an audience that would be interested in that. If there wasn't, we'll simply kind of start removing those and not, wasting our time to distribute those events. But it was an interesting marketing claim in the market, so we could state confidently that we had more live sports than anybody else, more live soccer than anybody else. So that was our position in the market as we launched. But as you know, and this is, I think, common knowledge, Brazil is not a very simple market to operate. So this was our first developing market for the zone in general. We've operated in markets with strong infrastructure, with consumers that are kind of more predictable for our business, and we had to deal with quite a few, I'd say, experiences that the company was not as familiar with. So first of that, infrastructural challenges, internet quality and just availability in general varies a lot in the market. So we have regions in the big metropolitan areas in Sao Paulo, Rio, where the internet quality is outstanding. But then as you go to other cities in the north or northeast, you don't have the same type of quality. And our third division rights, for example, cater to a big audience in that part of the country. So that was a problem that we had to think about and how to anticipate some of the issues. High piracy levels, also known about Brazil, and I'll get into that a little bit more. We knew that would be a problem going in. I'd say we were probably surprised by how well accepted it is culturally, and how easy it is to watch a lot of our games illegally. We also had to deal with lower credit card penetration in comparison with other markets. So as a business, we only supported credit cards, and as we were going to this market, we had to figure out a way to expand that and just to expand our addressable market. Otherwise, you're just limiting the opportunity for the business. And in general, lower familiarity with streaming services. So we had a lot of people that are not necessarily consuming content via like a platform like DAZN. So Netflix did a very good job in other services growing that market. But when you're dealing with soccer rights, you're essentially making some of the traditionals, not necessarily old adopters, the early adopters, kind of transition very quickly. Overnight, you only give them an option to watch that particular popular game on your service that they're not comfortable with. So we had to deal with a lot of education in that market. The first things we did pre-launch to tackle the network, the potential infrastructural challenges, was to work a lot with the internet providers in the country to optimize networks. So to understand areas of the country that wouldn't be able to handle our load or weren't necessarily prepared to handle the traffic that we would expect around some particular event. So we worked for around 4 months ahead of launch with a lot of the internet providers to optimize the network, to make sure like we had all the kind of the CDN capacity to handle the traffic that we would face in Brazil. It was on the back of an experience we just had in Italy as well. In Italy, we had issues when we launched with the south part of the country. We didn't do as much preparation as we should have, or then that we learned later that we should have done. And then in Brazil, we took all the steps to really make sure the largest providers were prepared for what we were introducing to the market. The second thing that we did pre-launch that was very interesting, was to start working with initially free-to-air broadcast networks to distribute the content that we had already acquired, but we were not ready to launch in the market yet. That was, let's say, 3 months ahead of our launch, where we had already some contracts in place, but the platform was not ready. We're still working to finalize the details for launch. So we decided to work with some of those broadcast networks to distribute some of the rights that we already had, but with our DAZN brand, our talent, our experience, to start already getting the brand out there, getting people familiar with DAZN and what we would offer, and educating people on the service. So that proved to be an actual very beneficial strategy for the business that allowed us to launch in that market with a pretty high brand awareness for kind of compared to other markets, for like a much lower marketing spend. So those free-to-air partnerships essentially allowed us to get a lot of people exposed to our brand and drive tuning once the service started. It was something that we did opportunistically, that we decided to expand and to keep doing a lot more. And we're also now acquiring rights in partnerships with some of those free-to-air partners, but where we are funding most of the acquisition, and they still have to distribute the content with our brand and drive tuning. So there are quite a few call to actions that have been beneficial to the business, and those partnerships haven't cannibalized kind of our subscription business. So one good case study that we had was one Sudamericana match featuring a popular club called Corinthians there, reached over 14 million viewers in the first round of Sudamericana, while at the same time breaking the local YouTube live streaming record in Brazil with over 2 million viewers. The same match on TV and on YouTube had a great audience, and that is kind of the number of people that were exposed to DAZN. Our brand started to get educated about this new service that would come in, halftime show, heavily promoted, and it was something that we started to replicate in other markets. So it's something that was really beneficial. I'd say unique to this market, not many other market that would be possible. It's hard to imagine a company like NBC or CBS here being open to a partnership like that, but we saw an opportunity to do something with free-to-air networks there, and it worked really well. Piracy was indeed a big problem. As I mentioned, I think what surprised me after living 12 years abroad and going back to Brazil to start this business was how well culturally accepted it is. A lot of people buy those IPTV boxes and they think it's just like a different business model. You pay a one-time fee instead of paying a monthly subscription, and you can still watch every content that you want. And how easy it was to access. So it usually takes 30 seconds to find a pirate service. And there are a few of those, one of which I'm listing here, called Futemax, that are household names. Like, people are now very familiar with those and post on social media, point people to that service. And if you type on Google, Copa Sudamericana live in the evening of our games, Futemax will rank first, like above DAZN. That's how popular they are. It's tricky. And that's compounded by the fact that we had limited payment methods in the country. So even if a few people were willing to pay, but they try to sign up and they didn't have a credit card, they'll then get frustrated and find a legal service. And the biggest surprise to us was that when we saw the top part of the funnel in our kind of subscription journey, the number of people that would come to our homepage, create an account, share their email address, create a password, but wouldn't move past the payment page was way more than we've ever projected. So we were kind of on track with our subscriber numbers in the country for the first year. But when we looked at the top part of the funnel, that was shocking to us. It was really surprising, and we are now working to kind of try to convert those subscribers that might be tempted to pursue like an illegal alternative. And a lot of that behavior, we think, is because people would come in, they would sign up, and as they have to share their credit card information with the company they're not familiar with, they'll say, let me just see if I can find this match elsewhere, like 30 seconds. If I can find it, I'll do it. If I can't, like, I'll go back. And we think piracy explains a lot of that. And we're trying hard to improve that. First thing we're doing, we're working very closely with rights holders. This is a region where rights holders are not as sophisticated as we used to in Europe or here in the US. They don't always know what they have to do to tackle piracy, what service providers they need to work with, what are the minimum requirements they need to enforce with broadcasters. So we've been spending a good amount of time with the domestic rights holders to educate on best practices and start enforcing some of those across the board. The second point, which is not just Brazil, we're making, but Brazil's driving a big part of the business case, really, to introduce watermarking technology to allow us to identify our users that are leaking the feeds. So the source of the feeds, usually on this site, Futemax, most of the games are our games, our talent, our brand, and we introduced an interim solution that worked. We were able to take down the feed for 3 weeks, but those guys are so good and so sophisticated that they figure out what we're doing, and they blocked our ID, and they started to distribute the game again, our games again. So, but now we're working on kind of a more complex and harder to identify watermarking technologies, so we can essentially identify our users that are leaking the feed and hopefully make this harder for the pirate services. And the third point was that we decided to lower the price to create a kind of reduced incentive to go for a pirate option. We did a lot of A/B testing as well with this top part of the funnel, and as we were showing a lower price to many of those guys, the conversion changed significantly. That, for us, the additional volume of subscriber would justify the ARPU reduction, so we decided to do it. So after 8 months of operation, after those A/B tests, giving us very clear results that it will make sense to drop the price at this level, we just did it, and the results, and we did that like a month ago, and the results have been clear, on par with what we projected. So the conversion on this top part of the funnel has been way higher than what we were seeing with the older price. The other things that are important in this market that we're working on, and it's a priority for this year, for this quarter actually. So we're introducing a local gift card program, something that for the US market, or even our European markets, might not represent a significant portion of the revenue, but with Brazil, we think this could be 30 to 40% of our annual revenue derived from gift cards, because, as I mentioned, quite a few people don't have credit cards, quite a few people don't even have bank accounts, but will be interested in watching those events. And we're now working with two of the leading providers in the world to launch a physical gift card operation in close to 30,000 retail shops in the country. So it will be a good experience to not only disseminate our brand, to get our brand out there in a lot of those retail shops in the country, but also expand the addressable market. We're working with banks as well to do direct debit, also very complicated system because fraud is extremely high in the country, so we need to work very closely with the local banks to have systems that essentially can talk to each other to validate the user flow. Otherwise, they're not gonna, they simply don't work with an automated system that is not fully integrated with them. So it's a complicated one, but we're working towards that. And the second thing is that another point that we think will improve our case against piracy is partnerships with mobile providers to offer access to our service without using kind of the data allowance that most people have access to. So mobile data is still expensive in the market compared to the US or other European markets where we operate. So that was one factor that we didn't necessarily take into consideration. So a lot of people complain that they love to watch DAZN when they're on the go, but then when they get their data bill next month, it's just prohibitive, so they can't watch the events as they wanted. So we're now working with the mobile providers to offer some sort of benefit to some of their top clients, and also include DAZN as part of like the zero ratings plan, or kind of a data quota that people can consume that will kind of lower the price to our users. And also by allowing people to subscribe through their mobile carriers, so just like a direct carrier billing integration, that would also, again, expand our addressable market in a market where the mobile penetration is over 100%. So a lot of people have like 2 phones, and so that's a market that will essentially be able to maximize. So by offering gift cards, VCB, allowing people to consume the content without spending too much money on their data plans, that will be a combination that we think this year will put DAZN for a good, or allow us to maximize the opportunity to grow in that country. The other things that we're doing that we are excited about the initial results to keep working to change habits and to get people more comfortable with the platform that is so new to a big portion of that population, is working a lot closer with the platforms to essentially ensure that people can access our platform in a very seamless way. We're working with all TV manufacturers to have DAZN pre-installed and promoted as the kind of smart TV the smart TV purchase happens. We're working with some retail shops also to have retail programs, to have some sales agents also pushing DAZN as people are buying a new smart TV. And we just launched the remote control integration with Roku as well, that just launched in the market in partnership with AOC. So the remote controls of all those TV batches will come with like a DAZN button. They'll take people more seamlessly to DAZN. And finally, the other thing we've been doing to change habits that has proven to be very effective, and we didn't realize how powerful that would be, is to use push notifications cautiously but intensely, because with the rights portfolio that we have, especially with the international soccer rights, the experience was that a lot of people would come in for the big domestic events. They would value the international events, but in many cases they would forget about them, right? So they wake up on a Sunday morning, they have all the services at their disposals, Netflix, Amazon Prime, DAZN, other activities with like a country that is blessed with great weather. And then people would simply forget that some of those great events were available on DAZN. So as we started to experiment with a lot of push notifications, the engagement increased by an amount that was way beyond our expectations. So it validated a lot of our theory that people would value those events, but they're not necessarily as avid fans, as passionate about them to think about them like every weekend. But if you remind them that this event is at their disposal, they'll value it and they'll come to the platform. So we've been doing a lot of that with good results for the business, and something that we're going to need to keep doing more, because it's a new platform, new way to consume in that particular market, and the work to change habits not easy. So we need to keep reminding people that this is available for their consumption. But we're excited about Brazil in general, and it's a market that has a very strong sports affinity, soccer in particular. Obviously, high population market, so the sheer size of the market makes this a very significant opportunity for DAZN. And since we launched, we were the most downloaded sports app in the country every single month. So we were able to get a lot of people on the platform to experiment it and to consume the service with very kind of positive mentions and on social media and reviews in general. So we think we're onto something. We just now need to apply some of those learnings about events that work, shift the kind of resources in a more optimal way for the business. But we think we have a good path and a good opportunity in that market because it's not as competitive as a market like the US, right? Or markets like the UK where rights fees are really high. We were able to acquire a good number of those properties for a reasonable fee, a market where competition has consolidated a bit, so it's not as competitive as we've seen in our market. And we are in the leading position in this space, learning a lot of things that we think will give us a competitive edge to succeed in that market. And when the rights become available in the next cycle, we'll be in a good position to make competitive offers to acquire the rights. And we'll be a platform that people are used to, that they understand they're used to coming back. So it's a long-term game, but we think we made some initial steps here that will allow us to be very competitive in that market.